I'm getting married this week. There's only 5 days to go, and already I'm dealing with so much drama from my dad and my sister that I'm starting to wonder if it's worth it. For context, my dad's been a single parent for the last 10 years after my mom passed away from cancer when I was 16. It was rough on all of us, but honestly, I think it was hardest on me. I was so young and had no one really supporting me. My sister Amy always got away with everything, while I was left to deal with the fallout. My mom was fair to us both, but after she passed, my dad definitely favored Amy. He'd let her do whatever she wanted, and it seemed like she could do no wrong. Amy's 2 years older than me, and she's always been an entitled brat. When we were kids, she would boss me around like I was her personal servant. If I complained or stood up for myself, my dad would always side with her, saying she was fragile and needed my help. Of course, I knew she wasn't as delicate as he thought, but he never questioned her, especially since she had some health issues when she was younger. The problem was, she would still play the sick card well into her teens, always claiming she had some new illness just to avoid doing chores, leaving me to handle everything. I hated it, but I did it because nobody else would. Things didn't improve when I turned 18 and moved out for college. I finally got some space from her, and I didn't even talk to her much after that because we just didn't get along. She was rude, constantly trying to get under my skin, and overall just unpleasant to be around. Sure, I missed my dad, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice my mental health just to be in the same house with them. I know it might sound strange that, despite everything, I had a good relationship with my dad for so long, but we did. There were still moments where we'd fight, especially over how much he favored Amy. But in the end, he was still my dad, and I'd make up with him. Fast forward a few years, and I meet Andy, my fiancé. After 8 years of dating, we're finally getting married. We're both doing well in our careers, and it just felt like the right time. Unfortunately, things aren't going as smoothly for Amy. After college, she was living on her own for a while, but a year ago she decided to quit her job and start a jewelry business with a friend. They didn't do any research, didn't prepare, and of course the business tanked almost immediately. They burned through all the money they had raised from family and friends, and when it all collapsed, Amy was left jobless. It's been 6 months since the failure, and she hasn't even tried to find new work. She's just been living at my dad's house, depending on him for everything. My dad, who had been planning to retire soon, is now stuck supporting her. It's one of the things we've been fighting about recently. I think she needs to get her act together and find a job. She can't just mope around, relying on my dad to take care of her for the rest of her life. But my dad doesn't see it that way. He thinks she just needs time to recover emotionally from her failed business. We're at an impasse, and honestly, it's exhausting. Now, with my wedding coming up, things have taken a turn for the worse. My dad has decided that he won't be walking me down the aisle because he's going on a trip with Amy to scatter her cat's ashes. He says it's important for them to do this together and that she needs him more than I do right now. I don't even know what to say. I've never felt so betrayed in my life. I'm beyond hurt. My dad is supposed to be there for me on one of the most important days of my life, but instead, he's choosing Amy again. I've had enough. I'm done. I've been thinking about it for a while now, and I've made the decision. After this wedding, I'm cutting both of them out of my life. I can't keep going through this. I've tried for years to have a relationship with them, but it's always been one-sided. I deserve more than this. So, here's the situation. My wedding is in just a few days, and it's already turning into a nightmare. I'm getting married, and you'd think that would be a happy time, but my dad and my sister are making it anything but. Here's some backstory. My dad's been a single parent since my mom passed away when I was 16. It was a hard time for all of us, but honestly, I felt like I was the one who got the worst of it. My sister Sam always got away with everything. My mom had treated us equally, but after she passed, my dad just seemed to give Sam whatever she wanted. It's like she could do no wrong, and I was left to pick up the pieces. Sam is 2 years older than me, and she's always been a drama queen. When we were younger, she treated me like her personal servant. If I didn't do what she wanted, my dad would back her up, claiming she was too fragile to do things for herself. It wasn't true, but he bought into it, and I ended up doing all the chores. I hated it, but I had no choice since no one else would step up. After I turned 18 and moved out for college, things finally started getting better for me. I didn't have to live with Sam anymore, and we didn't stay in touch after that. I couldn't stand being around her, and honestly, she was never very nice to me. I get that people might think it's strange, but I actually had a decent relationship with my dad. Sure, we fought because he was always biased toward Sam, but he was still my dad, and we would eventually make up. I met my fiancé Max in college, and after 8 years of dating, we decided it was finally time to get married. We're in a good place now, both with our careers and our lives. But Sam is in a very different position. She's been living with my dad since her failed attempt at starting a jewelry business with a friend. They didn't plan it right, burned through all the money, and now she's jobless, refusing to look for anything else. My dad, who was planning on retiring soon, is now stuck supporting her, and it's caused a lot of tension between us. I think Sam needs to grow up and get a job. My dad, on the other hand, thinks she just needs time to recover emotionally from everything that's happened. A couple of weeks ago, my dad told me he couldn't walk me down the aisle. Naturally, I was confused and upset because I assumed he would be there for me. But when I asked him why, his response left me speechless. Apparently, Sam had just lost her cat of 15 years, and my dad thought it was more important to take her on a trip to scatter the ashes in Hawaii. Sam had taken her cat there years ago, and it was a place full of memories for her, so she wanted to do it on the day of my wedding, exactly 1 month after her cat died. My dad said he couldn't be there for me because Sam needed him for emotional support, since this was the first time in weeks that she had shown any interest in doing something. At first, I tried to stay calm. I told him that maybe a friend could go with her, or she could scatter the ashes a day or two after the wedding so that he could still attend. But no, he insisted Sam was firm on the date, and when he tried to suggest any alternatives, she threw a tantrum, accusing him of not caring about her. She even told him that on my wedding day, I would have a bunch of people around me, but she only had him, so he should prioritize her because she was going through a hard time. When my dad actually agreed with her and said that Sam should be the priority right now, I lost it. I told him that Sam had been his priority her entire life, and now, on my wedding day, he was choosing her over me again. I couldn't even let him explain himself. I felt completely betrayed. I'm done. I'm done with both of them. I tried for years to make things work, but I can't keep pretending that this is okay. I deserve to be a priority in my own life, and I'm not going to keep chasing people who clearly don't value me. After my wedding, I'm cutting them both off. It's over. My wedding is in just 2 days, and everything is a total mess. To catch you up, I asked my dad to walk me down the aisle, but instead of saying yes, he told me he wouldn't be able to because he was going to accompany my sister Mia to Hawaii to scatter her cat's ashes. You might be wondering why this is such a big deal, but I'll get into that in a second. Mia and I have always had a rocky relationship. She's 2 years older than me and has always been, well, spoiled. She's also the queen of playing the victim and manipulating everyone around her. Growing up, she got away with everything while I was left to clean up the mess. My dad always seemed to favor her, and even after I moved out for college, things didn't change. We barely talk, and honestly, I've been fine with it, until now. So here I am, about to get married, and I think my dad will be there to support me. But no. Instead, he's choosing to go with Mia on this trip to Hawaii because apparently, her cat, the one she's had for 15 years, passed away, and she needs him for emotional support. Fine, I get that losing a pet is hard, but this is my wedding day we're talking about. Mia's been using her cat's death as an excuse to get attention, and now my dad is prioritizing her over me. I was pissed, but tried to stay calm when I spoke to him. I suggested she could wait a few days to scatter the ashes, or maybe have a friend go with her. But no, my dad said Mia was firm on the timing. And then he said something that really set me off. He actually agreed with Mia that she should be the priority right now because she's going through a tough time. That's when I lost it. I told him that Mia had always been the priority, and on my wedding day, he was still choosing her over me. I didn't even let him speak after that. I hung up on him and blocked him everywhere. I was so upset, but then I decided I was going to get back at him in a way that would really sting. If he wasn't going to be there for me, I was going to make sure I did something that would hurt him. I decided to ask my Uncle Mark to walk me down the aisle. Now my dad and Uncle Mark have always hated each other. They're twins, but they've been at odds for as long as I can remember. Their rivalry is legendary in our family. When they were younger, they'd try to one-up each other constantly, and it made every family event super awkward. After my mom passed, my dad refused to go anywhere if he knew Uncle Mark would be there, so I was kind of stuck in the middle. I never really had a close relationship with my uncle, but I knew enough about their history to understand that asking him to walk me down the aisle would seriously piss my dad off. I reached out to Uncle Mark, and when I told him my plan, he was surprised. He said, "We're not that close, are we?" But once I explained that it was mostly to get under my dad's skin, he was on board. Honestly, he laughed and said he would never pass up the chance to embarrass my dad, even if they were both in their 50s by now. So we agreed that I'd post about it on social media, making sure my dad would see it, and I did. Later that evening, I posted how grateful I was to have my uncle walking me down the aisle. The response was immediate. My phone blew up, and within hours I got a call from my dad. I had unblocked him just for that purpose. When he called, he was furious. He said I was insulting him by even considering my uncle for such an important role. He begged me to let him walk me down the aisle instead, saying he'd convince Mia to delay the ashes scattering. I just told him he had his chance and blew it. I told him this was me giving him a taste of his own medicine. He called me petty and immature, and I agreed. I was being petty, but at that point I didn't care. By the end of the call, my dad was crying. He said I had no empathy and was being evil for doing this to Mia when she had lost everything. According to him, I couldn't even let Mia have him for one day, especially when she was struggling so much. Honestly, hearing him say that made me feel guilty. Yes, Mia was struggling, but this was my wedding. My dad had made it clear over and over again that he wasn't going to prioritize me, and I was sick of it. But as the wedding approaches, I've decided to do something else. 2 days to go, and I've made up my mind. I'm walking down the aisle alone. I don't need to deal with all this drama anymore. It's clear that I can't rely on either of them, and I'd rather go through this day by myself than continue to beg for their attention. I talked to my uncle again, and he was totally fine with it. He'll just be a guest, like he was supposed to be from the start. As for my dad, I didn't want another heated phone call, so I left him a message. I told him he could come to the wedding if he wanted, but he didn't need to walk me down the aisle. I also told him that if he preferred to go to Hawaii with Mia, he was welcome to do that too, but that this was the last chance I was giving him. If he chose Mia over me again, I would cut him out of my life for good. I'm done asking for their support. I'm done being hurt by their choices. It's my wedding, and I'm going to make it a day about me, whether they're there or not. It's been a crazy couple of days, and I'm still processing everything. First off, I got married yesterday. Yes, it's real. I'm married, and it feels surreal. Along with my engagement ring, I now have my wedding band, and I couldn't be happier. But before I dive into the joy of that, I owe you all an update on what happened with my dad and my sister. Unfortunately, my dad didn't attend the wedding. Yep, you read that right. He decided to go with my sister Mia to Hawaii to scatter her cat's ashes. I'm not even going to go into the specifics of how messed up that is, but I know some of you were expecting a deeper explanation about why I'm not just accepting my sister's depression. I get it. Depression is real, and it's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. But here's the thing. I refuse to believe that Mia's actions were solely because of depression. This wasn't about grieving a pet. This was about Mia's ongoing need to one-up me and have all the attention. She could have waited a couple of days, done it earlier, or even made a different plan, but no, she picked my wedding day. I honestly think this was no coincidence. She has always had something against me, and I can't just chalk this up to depression. I'm not mocking her mental health struggles, but I'm also not letting her off the hook for trying to ruin my day, knowingly or not. Now, as for my dad, well, he's been a huge disappointment. This is not the first time he's let me down, and I'm done trying to convince myself that things might change. He chose to go to Hawaii with Mia, and the worst part is, he didn't even tell me until after my wedding. I was left in the dark, waiting for any sign that he'd show up. But when the ceremony was over, I got the text from him. He said that he couldn't make it because Mia needed him more. She was more emotionally dependent on him, so he chose to be with her. He said he was sorry and hoped I'd understand. That part was whatever, but then he added that my petty and immature behavior with asking my uncle to walk me down the aisle had put him off and that it was better if we stayed apart for a while. I mean, are you kidding me? Yeah, it was petty, but can you blame me? After everything, he was the one who let me down first. I wanted to know if he cared at all, and clearly not enough to even show up for me on my wedding day. So I blocked him and moved on. I wasn't going to let his absence ruin my day. People did ask why my dad and sister weren't there, and I was honest with them. I told them exactly what happened because at this point, I don't have the energy to pretend it was something else. I wasn't going to let them think it was some trivial reason. It's not. It's about my dad choosing my sister yet again over me. Anyway, I'm done wasting my time wondering what he thinks. This is my wedding, my life, and I deserve to be happy. I've always had to worry about how my decisions would affect him, but that ends now. I'm not going to tolerate this kind of disrespect anymore. Update. The wedding was perfect. I walked down the aisle by myself, and honestly, it was one of the best decisions I made. I didn't need anyone else to walk me down that aisle. I was strong enough to do it on my own. And while my dad's absence stung, I realized something important. I've been doing everything in my life without him in my corner, and I'll keep moving forward just fine without him. It's been a week since my wedding, and while things have settled down a bit, I still feel like I need to share the latest developments. Andy and I are about to head off on our honeymoon, but of course, my dad and Katie just couldn't let me enjoy my life without stirring up drama. They decided that now was the perfect time to confront me about what I'd told people at the wedding regarding their absence. 3 days ago, Katie texted me. I hadn't blocked her, I only blocked my dad. But after reading her message, I definitely considered it. She just had to text me, trying to take the moral high ground. I get that most people would suggest I go no contact with both of them, but I haven't done that yet. I can't bring myself to cut off Katie completely, even though she's been toxic. The only reason I haven't blocked her is that I know she'll be the one to inform me if something happens to my dad, whether that's an accident or illness, and I want to be aware in case of an emergency. But honestly, that's the only reason she's still on my radar. I know my morals might not make sense to some people, but I can't just throw away the relationship entirely with my sister, even if my dad has been awful. I'm trying to hold on to some semblance of decency, but I'm also not going to let them continue treating me like this. It's a fine line, but it's where I stand. Anyway, here's the text Katie sent me. Hey, we just got back from Hawaii, and we've already been contacted by several relatives. They think we were wrong for choosing your wedding day to scatter my cat's ashes. I'm not surprised that you decided to tell everyone this story and portray us in such a negative way, but I'm just disappointed that you're still on me, even though you know how tough things are for me. I really wish you had more compassion for me. Dad has also noticed that you blocked him, and he's upset about it. I think you should undo that. Honestly, you need to be more thoughtful about others. You can't just go through life thinking only about yourself. I hope you understand what I'm getting at and apologize. Even if you don't, I won't be surprised. If you're still holding this grudge, there's really little I can expect from you. The message itself just enraged me. The tone, the way she played the victim, again. It was like she didn't even hear anything I was saying. I wanted to block her right then and there, but I decided to take a breath and respond, just to get it all off my chest. Here's what I sent back. Hey, Katie, I did tell our relatives the real reason why you and Dad weren't at my wedding. I decided to be honest about it because I'm not a liar, and you two put yourselves in this position by choosing not to show up. I think it's unfair to expect me to cover for you, especially when you both have been unkind to me for years. You couldn't even think about me for just one day, my wedding day, and put me first. So I don't think I owe either of you an apology. As for Dad being upset about being blocked, he should have thought about that before. I've made up my mind. I don't want any contact with either of you. If there's an emergency, you can text or call me. Otherwise, I ask that you do not contact me at all. Both of you have hurt me enough over the years, and I agree with what Dad said. It's probably best we spend some time apart for now. I'm a married woman now, and I want to focus on my life with my husband. He's my family now. I wish you both the best. Goodbye. I felt so much better after sending that. Of course, Katie replied almost immediately. But honestly, it didn't even matter to me anymore. She said, "Wow, I guess this is it then. I really thought you'd be more understanding, but clearly you're not. I guess I was wrong about you. Good luck with everything. I hope you figure out what you want before it's too late." I didn't even bother responding. The message itself was just a repeat of the same old thing. Her trying to make me feel bad for her and guilt trip me. The tone was no different from the dozens of other times she's made me feel like the villain in this whole situation. Honestly, the moment I hit send on my final reply, I felt like a weight had been lifted. I don't need their negativity in my life anymore. They've shown me who they are, and I finally reached the point where I'm ready to move on. Now I'm just focusing on the next chapter. Andy and I are heading off on our honeymoon in a couple of days, and I'm so excited to start this new life with him. He's been my rock through all of this, and I'm so grateful to have him by my side. To everyone who's been supportive through this mess, thank you. Your encouragement means the world. To anyone still judging me for my decisions, I'm at peace with it. It's my life, and I'm done trying to make people who don't care about me happy. Here's to new beginnings and a life built on my terms. It sounds like you're finally taking control of your own happiness, and that's such a huge step. After everything that's happened with your dad and Katie, it's understandable that you'd want to distance yourself and protect your peace, especially on a day as important as your wedding and now your honeymoon. It seems like you've made a clear decision to prioritize your own well-being, and while that's bound to ruffle feathers, it's your life and your happiness that matter most. Your dad's reaction, while tough, is something that he has to own. He had the chance to show up for you and didn't. That's not on you, no matter how much guilt they try to throw your way. If he's upset, it's likely because he's realizing the consequences of his own choices. Katie's message just seems like more of the same manipulation, and I get why you're not willing to engage with that anymore. Now that you're focused on enjoying your honeymoon, it's clear you're doing the right thing by setting boundaries. You've been through a lot emotionally, and now it's time for you to take a breath, enjoy your time with Andy, and not let anything or anyone steal that joy story too. Confronted my wife about her affair partner is the title of this narrative. Women may now have it both ways, she stated with a giggle. I then gave her cake. Hello everyone. All I wanted to do was tell you the truth. Recently, the channel has been a little slower, and to be honest, I worked really hard to uncover these tales so that I could continue to provide you with the greatest material. It would mean the world to me if you clicked the subscribe button if you like what I do. Your assistance is crucial to the success of our adventure and makes all the difference. I really appreciate you being here with me. Let's begin the video now. OP begins by stating, my wife and I felt like a team when we first met. She had a profession in management and was self-assured and ambitious. I was using my abilities and expertise to advance in the field of coding rather than a formal degree. At first, it seemed that our differences were complementary. I make fun of her business lingo, and she ridiculed me for not having a degree. I thought it was innocent fun. We were almost equals when we got married. We had no debt, comparable wages, and shared household expenditures. Our lives were pleasant, and we enjoyed cooking together, watching TV, and going on date evenings when we had free time. We even set up one of our extra bedrooms as a potential nursery since we hoped to establish a baby eventually. Everything changed when the epidemic struck. We both started working from home, like many couples do. It was doable at first. While I continued to use my current setup, we converted one of the extra rooms into our office. I didn't give any thought to how it would impact us because it felt fleeting. However, as the weeks stretched into months, I began to notice little changes. We took a distinct, even diametrically opposed approach to working from home. To indicate that I was in business mode, I would rise early, prepare breakfast, take a shower, and even put on a suit. In contrast, my wife got out of bed in sweatpants and started working right away, frequently using her iPad to play games in between emails. Initially, there was only a stylistic distinction. I reasoned that as long as she completes tasks, it doesn't matter how she works. However, the tension began modestly. She said that I made her feel excluded by shutting my office door during discussions. She didn't seem to comprehend when I told her that I required attention during my daily scrum meetings. She began stating things like, "Why are you hiding?" At any case, we spend the entire day at the same residence. I dismissed it even though it seemed like a jab. When I attempted to maintain our routines outside of work, the true hardship began. She would dismiss my suggestions of cooking something new or having a movie night, claiming that we already spend the day together. Why is more time with each other necessary? That was painful. She was aloof now, even though we had always been close, as if being in the same home was sufficient to establish a bond. A few months into the lockdown, her office partially reopened, and she seized the opportunity to return. I didn't blame her for wanting to see her coworkers again. Although my business remained entirely remote, I still missed working in an office. She began to come home later and later, going to work 3 days a week. I initially thought she was simply getting used to the new routine, but it quickly became apparent that she wasn't merely working late. She was going out for supper or drinks with her coworkers. She gave me a hazy response when I asked her about it once. The same old folks. She spoke without making eye contact. I didn't want to come out as worried, but I was uncomfortable. We were both under a lot of stress, after all. Our distance from one another increased. She no longer displayed the warmth she once did. Cold apathy took its place. I began to notice things that I had previously overlooked. How she had turned her phone into a secret dot, ignoring texts containing just work-related content or moving aside to answer calls. She was more reclusive and quieter at home, and any attempts to engage with her were either dismissed outright or received with indifference. We were almost strangers by the time we celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary. I reminded myself that every partnership had a difficult time. I didn't want to think that I was losing the woman I had spent so much time with. But I had a gut feeling that something wasn't right. On a Saturday morning, everything fell apart. "Can you wipe this for me?" my wife said casually as she gave me her old iPad. "My niece will get it from me." The request wasn't out of the ordinary. She frequently turned to me for tech-related assistance. She left the home after I nodded, hardly raising my head to get my coffee. She said she had errands to go shortly after. I didn't give it much thought. Later in the day, I want to reset the iPad, which I have placed on my desk. However, I discovered it was still connected to her messaging app when I picked it up to begin the procedure. I looked at the screen out of habit. I noticed the first message at that point. I didn't do it. I didn't identify the source. It wasn't innocent either. I initially believed that I must be misinterpreting what I was witnessing, but reality struck me like a truck when I read through the discussion. She and her supervisor exchanged movies, pictures, and texts. Ones that are explicit. At least 2 months had passed since they began their affair. I continued to scroll while sitting there in disbelief, my hands shaking. My brain was completely unable to process. The lady I trusted, with whom I had lived my life, had been deceiving me. Not a casual lie either. This was bold and done with deliberate intent. The texts were worse than I thought they would be. She claimed that I was too predictable and uninteresting. She made fun of the way I suited up for meetings and grumbled about my work from home schedule. One message stuck in my head. I could yell at his lack of knowledge. "Right now, you're the only thing keeping me sane." I felt like I was punched in the stomach by that sentence. I reflected on all the occasions I had attempted to close the distance between us. The evenings I had recommended we hang out. The minor surprises. I had intended to lift her spirits. I had been patient when she withdrew. For her, it was insufficient. Or perhaps it was excessive. She had picked someone else anyhow. I closed the iPad and leaned back in my chair, looking up at the ceiling after transferring everything to a safe cloud drive. My stomach was roiling, and my heart was pounding. I couldn't decide whether to fight, yell, or weep. A gap in the wall. Rather, I sat still as the truth of her treachery dawned on me. I was unable to even look at her when she got home later that night. She welcomed me as if nothing had occurred, put her keys on the counter, and walked in the door with ease. How was your day, by the way? Her tone was light and informal as she requested. I muttered something about work and closed the door behind me as I entered my office. My thoughts were racing. Shall I go up to her? Shall I insist on an explanation? However, I had nausea each time I pictured the talk. She had been so arrogant, so thorough in her falsehoods. I didn't believe that I could remain composed. I phoned a lawyer the next day. Although I had never spoken to one before, I realized that I couldn't do this on my own. I explained everything to the lawyer, who listened to me attentively, from the texts I had discovered to our marriage's increasing estrangement. He asked me a straightforward question once I was done. "How would you like to handle this?" "I'd like a divorce." I spoke, and my voice was firmer than I had anticipated. He seems unsurprised. "You will want more proof if such is the case. Given the unpredictability of courts, the more evidence you have, the better. To obtain the information we want, I advise using a private investigator." He clarified that infidelity might have a big influence on alimony and wealth distribution in our at-fault state, but only if we had a strong argument. He advised you to maintain your composure. Do not yet face her. Give her the impression that she got away with it. She will get more reckless the more at ease she is. Although that seemed like wise counsel, the idea of remaining silent was intolerable. She always made small chat or smiled at me when I saw her. My back felt like it was being stabbed again. The private investigator did his job fast. They had more proof in a week than I ever imagined. Pictures of her at her boss's residence when they first met, recordings of them sharing a kiss in the parking lot following work, screenshots of their communications with the timestamp. Everything was there in agonizing detail. I was both relieved and heartbroken when the investigator gave me the final report. Although her actions were undeniable, witnessing every betrayal in black and white was like going through the agony again. I was scarcely able to function at home by now. I tried to stay away from her as much as I could, talking to her very little and spending much of my time at my office. She didn't appear to be aware or concerned. She had her phone with her at all times. Her countenance brightened, and I saw messages streaming in that I knew weren't from me. She stopped trying to talk to me at all and ceased inquiring about my day. I couldn't contain myself any longer one evening while she was sitting on the couch going through her phone. "Do you believe I'm ignorant?" My voice shook with rage as I spoke. Startled, she raised her head. "What are you discussing?" I tightened my hands as I stood there. "I am aware of you and your supervisor. I've seen the films, the images, and the writings. Don't waste any more time lying." She only gazed at me. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and another emotion, resistance. Finally, she crossed her arms and said, "How are you going to respond to this?" Her smugness, her tone, it irritated me. "How will I proceed? I am divorcing you. I'm going to do just that." She shook her head and grinned. "Oh, please. Even if you attempt to leave me, you won't. Half of everything will go to me. You might as well remain. We both benefit from it." Her statements, her haughtiness, and her total lack of regret. My brain seemed to flick a switch. "Do you believe this to be a marriage?" My voice was little more than a whisper when I spoke. Her chuckle made my blood boil. It was frigid and harsh. "This is the 21st century, honey. It's possible for a woman to have it both ways." I made the decision that I wouldn't simply abandon her at that point. I was determined to ensure that she felt the consequences of her actions. Everything changed after that night. I thought I knew the lady I'd married, but she was gone, replaced with a chilly, uncaring person. Her last words, her smugness, and her laughter, "It's possible for a woman to have it both ways," reverberated in my mind for days. I kept reliving the scene over and over again, feeling the rage simmer under the surface. My attorney had previously advised me to control my emotions. He cautioned that theatrics are not encouraged by the courts. Fairness and professionalism are important to judges. Any emotional gimmicks might backfire on you. I replied I'd keep it civil and nodded. However, I secretly hoped she would experience some of the embarrassment she had given me. That quote when I had the notion. I would make sure she would never forget those comments for the rest of her life if she wanted to discuss having her cake and eating it too. I began searching for a bakery that specialized in making personalized cakes. I eventually located one that provided edible picture printing. Any picture you provide will be recreated in icing. It was flawless. I selected a picture from the material I had acquired that would convey the point clearly without being overtly explicit. Although they were dressed, it was clear that she and her employer were in a precarious situation. I had the phrases piped in strong, ornamental icing above the picture. "Your cake is here, consume it as well." I didn't provide any information, and the bakery didn't inquire. I couldn't help but smile as I took up the cake. It was petty and absurd. However, it felt like justice at the time. Retaliation wasn't the point here. It was about taking back my honor. I arranged for the divorce papers and cake to be brought to the process server's office. He was an elderly man who had likely witnessed everything. However, he burst out laughing when I explained the idea to him. "I'll give you that you have guts." "Oh," he said, "this is going to be a memorable tale." I eagerly awaited his news the next day. As soon as the phone rang, I picked it up. "You won't believe the scene," he remarked, his laughter hardly contained. With a cake in hand, I entered her workplace at lunch and called her by name. As if nothing were wrong, she was seated with a bunch of co-workers, laughing and joking. She verified her identity. I then placed the papers next to the box after I had opened it and placed it on the table. "You've been served," I said. What came next? I leaned forward in my chair and asked. At first she froze and just stared at the cake. Then she became pale. One of her colleagues gasped as she bent over to see. "God, oh God!" She screamed and swatted the cake off the table, going fully crazy at that point. However, it fell onto the carpet, face up. It was seen by everybody. Others simply left, while others burst out laughing. Without saying anything, her boss hurried out of the room. I had a mental image of it. She was hit by the turmoil, the humiliation, and the truth of what she had done. It was more than gratifying. It was therapeutic. The consequences were immediate. Within minutes of the cake being delivered, my phone began to explode. Voicemails and texts, missed phone calls. It didn't stop. I first disregarded it and let the alerts to accumulate. Then I got a text from her mom. "For the time being, she is staying with me. Please wait till it's urgent before contacting her." The irony made me chuckle. She was behaving as though she was being harassed by me. In the meantime, I hadn't even answered any of the messages that evening. Sitting in my office, I thought back on my actions. A nagging worry was taking the place of the first surge of delight. I kept thinking about my lawyer's cautions. There is no sense of humor among judges. Pettiness of any kind might harm your case. Would this stunt backfire on me in court if I had gone too far? I was concerned about how the message would be interpreted, but I didn't regret sending it. My ultimate objective was to protect myself during the divorce, even though I really wanted to see her humiliated. The last thing I needed was for a cake to put my job in danger. I phoned my lawyer the next day to tell the truth. When I informed him what I had done, he let out a sigh. "Michael, I will not sugarcoat this. Such shenanigans are disliked by judges. You can appear vengeful as a result." I said defensively I wasn't trying to be vindictive. "I just had one thing to say." "I understand," he said. "It's hardly the worst thing I've ever seen, to be honest. You must now, however, concentrate on the wider picture. Don't get involved with the drama." I concurred. However, I still got the feeling that the cake had been worthwhile. The cake stunt had immediate and extensive repercussions. Her office was ablaze with rumors about her public humiliation by the next day. My mutual acquaintances started emailing me to inquire about the veracity of the stories. Based on the information they provided, I didn't respond to the majority of them. I put the scene that had transpired together. It appears that a number of colleagues recorded the cake reveal, and staff members were sharing the recordings. The man she cheated with, her employer, instantly cut off contact with her and wouldn't talk to her about anything other than work-related issues. They had notified HR. However, it appeared that no official complaints had been made as of yet. In the meantime, her alleged co-workers who had supported the affair suddenly turned on her. This filth was brought into the workplace by her. She deserves whatever consequences she faces, according to one of them. It was almost poetry in its irony. In order to defend themselves, the same individuals who had encouraged her were now using her as a scapegoat. At home, she was abandoned, shunned, and in a panic. It was more subdued. Since the delivery of the cake, she had not returned. Choosing to be with her mother. That was perfect for me. I ignored her calls and texts since my lawyer had told me not to speak with her directly. The majority of them alternated between pleading for my pardon and saying that I had ruined her life. Without responding, I sent everything to my lawyer. To be honest, I felt a little bad for pointing out her falsehoods, but for the sheer publicity of it all, she earned it. Our marriage wasn't the only one that had failed. Her social standing and professional life were now in ruins. However, each time I began to doubt myself, I recalled her smiling in my face and assuring me that I would never abandon her. Any last misgivings were allayed by that remembrance. She sent me an email a week later, requesting to visit the house so we could speak. My attorney suggested that I permit it, but only under very specific guidelines. Have witnesses present and note what he says. Later, you don't want her to change the story. 2 of our common friends came over to serve as witnesses after I gave my consent. While we waited for her, we set up our phones to capture the chat. She had a very different appearance when she entered. Agitated. She sat at the kitchen table, avoiding eye contact, looking anxious and quite different from the self-assured, arrogant girl I'd faced weeks before. I just want to explain, she said in a tremulous voice. I had no idea what happened to me. It seems as though I didn't even accomplish those things. I didn't have authority. I crossed my arms and leaned back. You have enough power to deceive me for months. I thought for a second that she would truly accept responsibility as her eyes began to well up with tears. She then changed the blame though. She stated it wasn't just me. My coworkers entered my thoughts. They insisted that I was worthy of more, that I was being held back by you. I held you back by raising an eyebrow. How? By having faith in you, helping you, supplying a house? My tone made her wince, but she persisted. They stated I needed someone who could push me academically and that you weren't ambitious enough. They gave me a feeling, as if I were missing something. Her justifications infuriated me. What the heck? A group of psychos and office gossips are analyzing me behind my back, which is why you cheated. She lowered her gaze to her hands. I just don't know why I allowed them to affect me. I'm not claiming it's an excuse. Then the actual bombshell was dropped. She acknowledged that following the cake incident, the same coworkers she now referred to as the 3 witches had betrayed her. They had begun blackmailing her in addition to severing their relationship with her. They threatened to disclose all the vile details of her affair to HR and demanded $5,000 in exchange for silence. If she failed to pay. Her voice was hardly audible above a whisper as she stated, I don't have that kind of money. I'm barely making ends meet after selling my automobile to pay for my legal bills. I need your aid, please. Stunned by her boldness, I gazed at her. After all you've done, you want my assistance? With tears running down her cheeks, she nodded. There is nowhere else for me to go. In addition to everything else, I don't want to lose my job. I nearly felt terrible for her for a second. Nearly. But then I recalled the laughs, the lies, and the texts. I gave a head shake. After this, nothing can return to normal. You must face the repercussions of your decisions. What ought I to do? Desperate, she asked. You should report yourself. I was direct. You should also report your coworkers and your employer. If you yield now, they will simply return for more. You can at least take charge of the story if you approach HR first. She paused, obviously caught between dread and self-preservation. However, what if I get fired? Then you're responsible, I said icily. This mess is your fault. I'm not going to clean that up for you, can I? She asked before she went. One final query. How about us? Is there any possibility that this may be resolved? I made no hesitation at all. We don't exist. It's finished. Obtain legal counsel and get ready for the divorce. I briefly believed she may disagree as her shoulders drooped. Instead, though, she simply nodded and left. It was like the last nail in the coffin as she heard it close behind her. I heard tidbits of her predicament in the days that followed. According to mutual acquaintances, she had not reported herself to HR, and the demands for blackmail were increasing. Her life was becoming unmanageable. But I stayed out of the way. I had devoted too much time and effort to her already. I had given up seeking retribution. All I wanted to do was go on. I was both relieved and terrified as the divorce process started. On the one hand, I was at last doing something about her treachery. However, I was aware that this would not be simple. Divorce is messy, even under the most favorable conditions. And ours was everything from friendly. For weeks, my lawyer had been getting ready, collecting evidence and recording all we could. The texts, the pictures, the romance, everything was prepared for presentation. He reminded me that since we were in an at-fault state, the split of assets and any alimony claims would be heavily influenced by her adultery. He advised me to be composed prior to our initial court appearance. The evidence is self-evident. Let her be the one with the irrational appearance. Temporary orders pertaining to the handling of debts and duties throughout the divorce procedure were the main topic of the first hearing. Her attorney made a strong effort to portray her as a victim. I had retreated physically and emotionally long before she strayed, he said, and the affair was an emotional reaction to neglect. Despite my want to giggle at the ridiculousness of it, I maintained a neutral expression. My attorney calmly responded, outlining the chronology and providing the proof of her affair. She had been the one withdrawing, lying, and skulking around for months, according to the texts and pictures. The court decided in my favor, seemingly unimpressed by her attorney's arguments. Up until the final judgment, I continued to have authority over the house, our joint accounts, and all significant financial decisions. Then everything began to go apart for her. Mutual acquaintances informed me that she was taking out a loan from her parents to make ends meet, and she had previously sold her car to pay for her legal bills. She was clearly having trouble keeping her life together, and the blackmail from her old co-workers had not ceased either. She continued attempting to get in touch with me in spite of everything. Almost every day came voicemails, emails, and sometimes handwritten messages. Not because it was unique, but because it captured her attitude so well. One email stuck out. She wrote, "You're ruining my life. How is it possible to simply discard everything in this manner? If you would just quit being so obstinate, we could resolve this." It was nearly comical. She was still blind to the fact that she had harmed herself. I didn't reply and forwarded the email to my attorney. I had lost all interest in playing her games. Things became more heated on the second hearing. Her attorney vigorously pursued alimony, claiming that she was entitled to financial assistance to rebuild her career after her reputation at work was unjustly harmed. Given that the proof of her affair was the cause of her tarnished reputation, it was a daring action. It didn't even require a detailed rebuttal from my lawyer. Since her conduct had directly led to her predicament, the judge rejected the claim outright. The division of assets was also examined by the court. I should keep whole ownership of the house and most of our joint savings, my lawyer argued persuasively. He made it clear that her adultery had destroyed the marriage and that I had been the main provider for years. The judge rejected her lawyer's attempt to make the case for a 50-50th split. She just had her own possessions and a tiny amount of our funds after the final decision. I retained the majority of our possessions, including the house and the automobile. When the judge made the announcement, she seemed totally dejected. I felt a tinge of sympathy for a second. Then I recalled all the falsehoods. The pity, the haughtiness, and the laughing soon vanished. She made one final Hail Mary attempt outside of court. In an email, she recommended that we go to marital therapy in order to mend our relationship. My attorney suggested that I consider the possibility because it would make me appear reasonable to the judge, not because I had to make amends. Even if it's only on paper, judges like to see that you're willing to compromise, he said. Zoom was used to conduct the therapy session. I was in my home office while she was at her mother's house, saying phrases like, "It takes two to create distance in a marriage, and both of you need to take responsibility for what went wrong." The counselor devoted much of her time to trying to place blame. I declined to participate in the story. I just stated I don't agree. There was no breakdown on both sides. Our marriage was ruined by the decision she made. Despite not pressing more, the counselor appeared agitated. My wife inquired whether I would be open to another meeting at the conclusion of the current one. How would we go about trying again? She begged. I made no hesitation at all. You can't turn back. Before she could reply, I logged off. I felt as though a burden had been lifted by the time the divorce was official. I had gotten nearly everything from the court's ruling: my finances, my home, and most all, my independence. I wasn't worried about that anymore, but she left with hardly enough to start again. She had to live with the decisions she had made. The last update. After the divorce was completed a few months ago, I believed I had finally moved on from everything. I put my house back in order, reconstructed my life, and even began to come to terms with what had happened. However, life tends to bring up unresolved issues again and again. It wasn't about me this time. She was the focus. A few weeks ago, a mutual buddy contacted me with some news regarding my ex-wife. It seemed that things had become worse at her employment. Her office turned into a tense minefield following the cake prank and the ensuing consequences. Her reputation was destroyed, and the rumor mill was constantly churning. When evidence of her affair with her employer was anonymously submitted, HR finally intervened. Pictures, texts, everything. I was very certain of the identity of the unidentified individual. Although she wasn't dismissed right away, her reputation inside the organization was essentially ruined when she was placed under investigation. However, her employer wasn't as fortunate. Someone in his position misusing authority and having an affair with a subordinate was not tolerated by HR. Security escorted him out of the building in front of everyone as part of his termination, which took place within a week after the probe. Her 3 buddies are witches. She was not supported by the co-workers who had promoted the romance. To protect their personal reputations, they fully betrayed her and threw her under the bus during their HR interviews. My ex-wife was fired within a month after she became a social outcast at work. But that's not the end of it. I received an unexpected email from an unfamiliar address a week after learning about the probe. "We need to talk about your ex-wife and my husband," was the subject line. It turns out that her boss's wife was incensed after learning about the affair. After the inquiry began, she received a tip from someone at his workplace and had been searching for information ever since. She was courteous, but clear, when she eventually got to me and asked if I had any supporting documentation. I hesitated at first. It felt messy to become involved in someone else's divorce. But then I remembered everything that he and my ex had done to me. And his wife wanted to remove him since he had contributed to the breakdown of my marriage. Giving her the means to do so seemed only right. I sent her all of the pictures, texts, and videos. She expressed her sincere gratitude and assured me that she would make good use of it. She responded, "He will regret every moment of this." Since she didn't hold back, I've heard, she almost quickly filed for divorce, and she completely demolished him in court with the evidence I presented. He was sentenced to pay hefty alimony, had to sell his house to fund the settlement, and lost custody of their children. The icing on the cake. In their social circle, his reputation was utterly destroyed. It turns out that his wife wasn't afraid to tell everyone who would listen about the specifics of his treachery. After losing her job, my ex-wife hasn't fared any better. She made an effort to locate employment in the same industry, but the rumors followed her around. With that type of baggage, no one wanted to hire them. She was living in a small apartment and worked part-time at a nearby retail establishment when I last heard from her. It has been stated that her parents have had enough of providing for her. She feels much more alone now that they have begun to distance themselves. According to mutual acquaintances, she appears depressed, as if the consequences of all she has done are now catching up with her. The boss is also having trouble. He is barely surviving due to his lack of employment, damaged image, and costly divorce settlement. If I said that hearing about his demise didn't give me a sense of satisfaction, I would be lying. He believed he could have everything, similar to my ex-wife. He's now suffering the price for it. The entire circumstance has served as a reminder that decisions have repercussions. For months, I wondered if it had been worth it to expose her so widely, and if I had made the correct decision with the cake stunt. I don't regret anything though. Given how everything turned out, they are currently coping with the devastation they caused when she and her employer attempted to destroy 2 marriages. Story 3. This narrative has a title. Unaware of what was about to happen, my parents intended to give their favorite daughter my portion of the inheritance. Hello everyone. All I wanted to do was tell you the truth. Recently, the channel has been a little slower, and to be honest, I worked really hard to uncover these tales so that I could continue to provide you with the greatest material. It would mean the world to me if you clicked the subscribe button if you like what I do. Your assistance is crucial to the success of our adventure and makes all the difference. I really appreciate you being here with me. Let's begin the video now. Hey Reddit, says the OP at the beginning. Perhaps someone can connect, but I suppose I'm simply ranting here. I'm Jordan, and I felt like an afterthought my whole life. When I was younger, I didn't always see it, but as I grew older, I came to understand that my parents had a favorite, and it wasn't me. Chloe, my 25-year-old younger sister, has always been their golden child. I am 28 years old, and although you would think that sibling rivalry would go away with age, it actually leaves a mark. When it is this obvious. I quote, LL begin from the beginning. When Chloe was 2 and I was 5, that year we both had birthdays. Of course, my parents gave Chloe this extravagant party. I'm referring to clowns, face painters, a petting zoo, and bouncy castles. They made every effort for her. I still recall eating cake and stroking a goat when I was sitting on the lawn. However, the most memorable moment was when I was asked, "Wow, do you believe your birthday will be celebrated with a party like this?" "No," I said. "Mine has already gone by." Yes. That same year, I had a family supper at home and a shop-bought cake from the grocery store for my birthday. That's all. Not a huge thing, is it? However, I can already see the difference as a child. It established the tone for all subsequent events. The best of everything was always given to Chloe. She received my parents' undivided attention, the newest toys, and the nicest outfits. Me? I was advised to wait, share, or simply handle it. I once saved my money for months on end when I was approximately 10 years old in order to purchase a new bike. It made me happy and proud. Chloe decided she wanted one too after seeing it the day I eventually got it home. She broke down and began to act out. Rather than encouraging her to wait her turn or save money, that next weekend my parents went shopping and got her a bike that was even better than mine. I still remember that moment. It has nothing to do with the bike. The message was that my efforts were in vain. Chloe was able to get what she desired. The narrative is over. It was hard to overlook the partiality at school, another battlefield. I was the straight A student who joined groups, studied late, and made a sincere effort to do well. My folks hardly noticed. Chloe, on the other hand, was the type of student who breezed through classes, barely making it with CS. On the other hand, my parents would be really proud if she had a B on even one test. As a thank you for her efforts, they would buy her something or take her out to dinner. I once played the lead in a school play in 4th grade. I was ecstatic to perform after weeks of rehearsal. On the night of the performance, my parents said they would come and support me. They missed my major scene since they arrived an hour late. They told me that Chloe needed to be comforted since she had a stomachache when I inquired what had happened. I learned later that she was doing well. While they were playing with her, they just lost count of time. I would want to claim that this was an isolated incident, but it wasn't. Even terrible was high school. Everything I poured myself into. I'm hoping they'll give me some credit. I kept a 4.0 GPA, edited the school newspaper, and captained the debate team. My folks hardly noticed. The majority of Chloe's time, however, was spent partying and going out with friends. However, my parents continued to pamper her as though she were the family's star. My junior year was one of the worst instances. I was one of 2 kids from my school chosen to go to Harvard for a prominent summer program. I was overjoyed since it was such a great honor. I expected at least some enthusiasm when I broke the news to my family over dinner. "That's excellent," my dad responded with a grimace. "Good for you," my mom responded, before bringing up Chloe's impending dancing recital. However, she was already showing everyone photos of Chloe dressed up for her performance. The kicker is this. Chloe's performance and my travel to Boston for the program were planned on the same day. In order to avoid missing her performance, my parents declined to take me to the airport. In the end, I had to request a lift from a friend's parents. It was painful and embarrassing, but I should have anticipated it at that time. I put my all into the application process when it came time for college. I wrote essays, studied for the SAT, and took part in as many extracurricular activities as I could for months. I ultimately received significant scholarships and acceptance into a number of prestigious colleges, including my ideal one. I recall making the announcement at dinner in the hopes of receiving some recognition. "That's good, but don't let it go to your head," my dad remarked, hardly raising his head from his plate. "Not everything is about college. Just remember us when you're out becoming a big shot," my mom continued. My parents, on the other hand, commended Chloe for knowing herself and resisting peer pressure when she barely finished high school and chose not to attend college. As a graduation gift, they even got her a car, something they never did for me. I suffered emotionally as a result of the ongoing partiality. During my teens and early 20s, I battled anxiety and despair. I started seeing a therapist after realizing I needed assistance by the time I started college. It was the first time it opened my eyes. Someone gave me emotional support and made it clear to me that I wasn't to blame for my parents' actions. Building my self-esteem and learning to validate myself rather than looking to my parents for approval took years of effort. I was able to establish a decent life for myself in spite of their lack of assistance. By the time I was 27, I had earned my own home, secured a solid career in finance, and graduated with honors from college. Although my parents may not be pleased with my accomplishments, I am. However, their partiality wasn't a passing fad. It followed me into adulthood and continues to have an unanticipated impact on our family dynamics. Everything changed 3 months ago with the death of my grandfather, David. One of the only family members that treated Chloe and me equally was Grandpa. Losing him was difficult for me since he was one of the few people who really saw me. He never showed preference, not with his children or grandchildren, and he valued justice above all else. Grandpa started a tiny family-run business from the bottom up, and it gradually expanded into something very big over time. Although he made it apparent that he wanted everyone to have equal opportunity, he also made sure his children and grandchildren knew the importance of hard work. That attitude was mirrored in his will when it was read. His inheritance was distributed evenly among his children, my dad, Ethan, and his siblings and their grandkids. This included me, Chloe, and our cousins. When I discovered my share was $500,000, I was in disbelief. That amount of money would radically transform my life. I could finally pay off my education bills, invest in my future, and maybe even start my own business like grandfather did. At first, I didn't think much about how my parents might respond. I mean, this was Grandpa's choice, and I believed they'd respect it. Boy, was I mistaken. After the reading of the will, my parents called me aside. They weren't thrilled about the prospects this money would present or thrilled for me. Rather, they were obviously distressed. "This doesn't seem fair," my father said. I asked him what he meant since I didn't understand. He continued by saying that Chloe was in worse need of the funds than I was. Their logic. Chloe continues to work part-time at a coffee shop and reside in their basement. They claim that she needs a bit more assistance since she is having trouble establishing herself. They maintain that it would be morally correct for me to give Chloe my share because I already had a steady career, a home, and no significant financial problems other from my college loans. What I was hearing was unbelievable. I made an effort to remain composed and clarify that this was not my choice. Grandpa owned it. He has a detailed will and desired equal treatment for each of his grandkids. However, they refused to let it go. "Do you really think it's fair that you have all this money while your sister is struggling?" my dad said. Despite my inward rage, I maintained my composure. They wanted to assist Chloe, and I understood that, I told them. I couldn't be expected to give up what my grandfather had left me. The guilt tripping began at that point. My father mentioned all the times they had assisted me that he could recall. He said he had paid for my braces as a child, which were, incidentally, medically required. Allowing me to live at home while I'm in college and purchasing school supplies for me. He carefully omitted the fact that they purchased Chloe a vehicle, took her on several shopping excursions, and still paid for all she needed even as an adult, despite the fact that I worked part-time and helped with family expenditures. My dad's tone changed when I kept my ground and refused to give up my inheritance. He responded, "I'll see to it that this is handled correctly if you don't do the right thing." I became aware of how terrible this situation was at that point. As the executor of my grandfather's will, my father was hinting that he would handle things himself. He validated my worst suspicions a few days later. "Grandpa's desires will be reinterpreted," he told me, and the rest of the family. In addition to the portion she previously received, he intended to give Chloe my whole fortune. According to his logic, if Grandpa had known Chloe's situation completely, he would have wanted her to have more. I was heartbroken. Money wasn't the only factor here. It was about being underappreciated and ignored for years. I had the impression that I was being told once more that my accomplishments and hard work were inconsequential. I realize now that I couldn't handle this on my own. I asked Linda, my grandma, for her opinion. When I explained the situation to her, she became enraged. Grandma was well aware of Grandpa's plans because they had been married for more than 50 years. "This is definitely not what David wanted," she remarked. "The will cannot be changed by your father." Grandma, S anger wasn't all she felt. She did something. She made contact with her attorney and the other will executors. She also included my dad's brothers, who shared her indignation. To avoid such circumstances, Grandpa had even included a clause in his will. According to the statement, anyone who disputed the equitable allocation of assets would completely forfeit their portion. My parents were shocked when I told them this knowledge. In an attempt to change his mind, my dad said he was only trying to protect Chloe's future. "Megan, my mother," added her voice, "this is being exaggerated by you. This ought to have been done internally. Why include everyone else?" I informed them that when Grandpa drafted the will, he had been completely aware of our circumstances and that he had always treated his grandkids fairly. At that point, my mother accused me of disparaging the deceased by implying that Grandpa wouldn't have approved of their proposal. I have never heard something so foolish. Throughout all of this, Chloe remained largely silent. She simply shrugged and stated, "Mom and Dad know best," when I attempted to speak with her in private. This is not what I asked for. I couldn't decide if I should be sad or furious. She was totally reliant on our parents because they had spoiled her, and it wasn't her fault. On the other hand, I hoped she would defend me. Only this once. In the end, the will was honored exactly as intended because of my dad's brothers and Granny. My father's obvious conflict of interest led to his removal as an executor. Even though I received my portion of the inheritance, I still felt resentful about the entire experience. My folks were incensed. They accused me of creating needless drama and inciting the family against them. My father even threatened to completely cut me off from their own will. "I never expected anything from you anyway," I said. I didn't care, but it felt like the statement touched a chord. After being treated as like I didn't matter for my whole life, it seemed like the last straw. Even though I was eager to move on, the consequences of this circumstance were still very much there. I believed the worst was over when Grandpa's will was affirmed. After being legally compelled to comply with my grandfather's desires, I foolishly thought my parents would back off and give me my inheritance. I was mistaken. It turned out to be one of the most stressful periods of my life, and the damage was only beginning. Let me first describe my parents' reaction. Being removed as an executor of the will infuriated my dad, Ethan. He said that I had plotted to degrade him with the help of Grandma and the other family members. "You don't know what you've done," he said. "The reputation of our family has been destroyed by you." As I stared at him, I tried to figure out how he could possibly believe that he was the victim in all of this. Megan, my mother, adopted a different strategy. She gave the guilt trips her full attention. "I'm not sure how you can sleep at night knowing that your sister is struggling while you're sitting on a mountain of money," she remarked. She mentioned all of the alleged sacrifices they had made for me as a child, cleverly omitting the years of unfair treatment. For the most part, Chloe said nothing. She didn't want to defy our parents, but I believe she felt uncomfortable about the whole thing. She just shrugged and stated, "I didn't ask for this." When I attempted to speak with her (1-on-1), it just between you and your parents. Even though I could sense she was uneasy, it still stung that she did not defend me. The turmoil with the extended family followed. By propagating the myth that I had somehow tricked my grandfather into giving me money, my dad attempted to turn the family against me. He said that I was ungrateful, self-centered, and greedy to anybody who would listen. He even went so far as to say that I had been indoctrinated by my grandmother to turn against the family. Fortunately, his story was not accepted by the majority of the extended family. Grandpa's will had been explicit, and the provision stating that shares would be forfeited if anybody challenged the distribution eliminated several possible points of contention. My dad's brothers were unapologetically supportive of me and didn't hesitate to say so. They were aware of the effort I had put in to reach my current position and the extent of my parents' fondness toward Chloe throughout the years. However, not everyone was on board. To maintain the peace, other cousins advised me to simply hand Chloe the money. "It's not like you need it, right?" one of them even added. You have a house and a nice job. Why don't you assist your sister? That remark infuriated me. The money wasn't the point. The principle was at issue. My parents had attempted to reinterpret Grandpa's explicit desires in order to support their story. Nothing would have changed if I had given up my inheritance. The notion that Chloe's needs and desires always come first would have been furthered by it. Regardless. About a month after the will was finalized, my aunt, one of my dad's siblings, hosted a family get-together, which was the tipping point. My parents showed up even though she deliberately didn't ask them in order to prevent any controversy. As soon as they entered the room, the tension was intolerable. My dad started yelling at me right away, accusing me of stealing from Chloe and betraying the family. He accused me of wrecking my sister's life and called me derogatory insults. Ever the dramatist, my mother dumped an old photo book at my feet and exclaimed, "Look at all these happy memories you've destroyed." It was simultaneously sorrowful, enraged, and embarrassed. I was unsure of how to react. Fortunately, my parents were ordered to leave by my aunt and a few other family members. After a heated argument, my dad finally rushed out, taking my mother with him. Upon their departure, I felt numb as I sat there. I knew I couldn't continue to allow them to dominate me, even though I detested that it had gotten to this point. For the first time, I understood how much their partiality had influenced not just the chances I lost, but also my self-perception. I made the decision to contact Grandma once more. I needed her advice now more than ever because she had been my pillar of support during this entire process. She groaned and remarked, "Your dad has always been stubborn, but this is a new low," when I told her about the event during the family get-together. Don't allow his actions cause you to question your own abilities. You're acting appropriately. Additionally, Grandma told me something that fundamentally altered my perspective on the matter. Grandpa was apparently urged to leave everything to Chloe and his will by my parents a few years ago. Grandpa had adamantly declined. He informed them that he didn't want to sow discord in the family and that he thought all of his grandchildren should be treated fairly. My parents' acts after Grandpa passed away were made even more enraged by the knowledge that they had attempted to control him while he was alive. Additionally, it made me feel validated. Grandpa had spoken his desires clearly, and I refused to allow anyone to change them. Equipped with this fresh knowledge, I went up against my parents once more. I questioned them directly about why they believed it was okay to defy Grandpa's desires. My father attempted to defend it by claiming that we were only considering Chloe's future. My mother also said, "You'll be okay without the money. We didn't want to do you harm. We simply believed Chloe required it more." I didn't believe it. I informed them that Grandpa would have drafted the will that way if he had desired Chloe to have more. They had no response to that. At least the legal struggle is ended, but our relationship is still uncomfortable. The will was carried out exactly as intended, and my dad was formally dismissed as an executor. I received my inheritance, but at a hefty price. I can't stand the critical looks and chilly shoulders, so I've stopped going to family gatherings. My parents hardly ever talk to me, and when they do, it's generally to accuse me of creating drama or to guilt-trip me. In spite of everything, I feel somewhat empowered. In my life, for the first time, I refused to be marginalized and defied my parents. It's simultaneously freeing and scary. However, there is a genuine emotional cost. I hadn't experienced anxiety attacks since college, but they've returned. In order to help me absorb things, I've been thinking about returning to therapy. Numerous old wounds have surfaced as a result of this circumstance, and I know that in order to go on, I must heal them. Even if there is still blowback, I'm resolved to stand my stance. I'm not going to allow Grandpa's belief in me go unappreciated. Update 1.1. That night, I called Chloe and broke down. Even though she understood our parents were at fault, I told her how much it hurt that she wasn't defending me. After a little pause, she said, "Jordan, I didn't ask for this. All of this turmoil was never something I wanted to be involved with. You're not in the center, Chloe, even though I know I stated that. It's working for you. They have prioritized you above me throughout our entire lives. Additionally, they are attempting to give you everything that Grandpa left for us both." You think that's unfair? She answered. I don't know, Jordan. After a lengthy silence during which I briefly believed she would agree with me. All I want is for things to return to their previous state. I didn't get in touch with her again for a period after that. With someone who didn't want to see the wider picture, I couldn't keep trying to make things better. However, something altered. Chloe unexpectedly phoned me a few weeks later and asked if we could have coffee. Despite my hesitation, I consented. She appeared anxious as we sat down. What you mentioned has been on my mind. She began by talking about how you were treated by your parents. You're correct too. It's unfair. It has never been equitable. I was taken aback. Chloe continued by saying that she had spoken to her grandmother and had heard some things from our early years that she couldn't even recall. Being the favorite wasn't as wonderful as it appeared, she acknowledged. She remarked, "They've always done everything for me, made excuses for me, bought me things, and saved me from problems. However, it has made me feel as like I am powerless to achieve anything on my own. Observing you confront them, I became aware that I desire more for myself as a result. I felt as though a burden had been lifted when I heard her say that. She seemed to genuinely understand my perspective for the first time. We spent hours discussing our early years, our parents, and the various ways in which their partiality had influenced our lives. Chloe informed me that she chose to attend college with her portion of the inheritance. She stated she was eager to take charge of her own life at last, but she wasn't sure what she wanted to study yet. I was so proud of her. It seemed as though we were at last beginning to mend our relationship, not as rivals, but as brothers who really helped one another out. Naturally, our parents weren't very happy with Chloe's choice. By accusing her of deserting the family, my mother attempted to coerce her into remaining at home. Chloe was wounded more than she admitted because my dad seldom spoke to her at all. For the first time in years, though, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone since Chloe remained strong in spite of their response. Update 2.0. Our parents were intensifying their resentment as Chloe and I were trying to mend our relationship. Let me begin with Megan, my mother. My mom made every effort to stop Chloe from going to college after she made the announcement. "You're leaving us just when we need you the most," she remarked. Chloe, "Not everyone is cut out for college. You don't need to convince anyone of anything." She clearly did not want Chloe to become self-sufficient. She enjoyed being in charge of Chloe since it allowed them to continue acting heroically by helping her out when things became difficult. For the first time, however, Chloe was not moving. In a sense, she was advocating for both herself and me. Our mother used phrases like, "You're just following Jordan's bad example," to try to include me in her arguments. She was silenced by Chloe. "This isn't about Jordan," she informed her. "My desire to live my own life is the reason behind this." I was filled with optimism after hearing that. Chloe found it difficult to leave our parents. Hold on. And I was aware of how brave she was to make that move. Ethan, my father, was a very different matter. Following the announcement of the college, he seldom spoke to any of us. When he did, it was dismissive and icy. He warned Chloe that she was squandering her wealth on education and that she would come to regret it when she was unable to cope with the stress. His rage became open animosity against me. Accusing me of corrupting Chloe and destroying the family, he began to propagate additional lies about me among the members of the family. Although it was painful, I was accustomed to his deceptive methods by this time. My dad's threat to sell the house where we grew up was the tipping point. One day, he contacted me out of the blue and threatened to sell the house if you and Chloe didn't change your ways. Perhaps then you'll understand what you're discarding. I was taken aback. The home was more than a piece of real estate. We built a lot of memories there, spent our holidays there, and grew up there. However, I refused to allow him to use it as leverage. "Do anything you want with the home, Dad," I told him. "I will no longer allow you to control me." I stopped taking his calls after that. Chloe and I began spending more time together in spite of the commotion. We decided to get together at least once per month, only the two of us. It was a little weird at first. We had never been this close before. However, as time passed, we began talking more about our lives, our early years, and our shared goals for the future. I was taken aback one day when Chloe said, "You know, I used to envy you." I thought she was kidding and I nearly laughed. "Feel jealous of me? For what purpose?" for having such self-reliance, for not requiring them the way I always have, she said. I believed that I had it better since I was the favored. I understand now, though, that it only held me stuck. I wasn't prepared for how hard that affected me. I had been upset with Chloe for years for taking advantage of our parents' attention, but I never considered how it had hampered her. I came to see that, while in different ways, we were both victims of the same poisonous dynamic. I pushed myself into maximizing my wealth while Chloe began her college career. To my great relief, I paid off my college loans first. After that, I put up savings and investments for the future with the help of a financial counselor. I didn't stop there, though. Motivated by the therapy I had begun while in college, I made the decision to donate a portion of the funds. I made contributions to neighborhood mental health groups and even began organizing a little scholarship fund for children from similar households. Children who required a little assistance to escape challenging situations. My grandmother Linda was my staunchest ally during this entire ordeal. She made me think of how delighted my grandfather would have been to see me defending my rights and making good use of my fortune. She went on to tell more about him, including how he kept a scrapbook of my accomplishments, how he used to boast to his friends about them, and how he always thought I would do something worthwhile in life. I've found strength in their stories. I felt invisible in my own family for a very long time. However, it was very comforting to know that my grandfather noticed me and had faith in me. In the meantime, my mother was taking tentative measures to mend fences. At Grandma's encouragement, she began attending treatment, and a few months later she contacted me. She asked if we could speak and acknowledged that she hadn't always been fair. I cautiously agreed. I wanted to be sure she was sincere about changing, but I wasn't ready to forgive her entirely. She listened to me for the first time in my life when we met for lunch. She made no effort to justify or defend herself. She simply listened. It wasn't flawless, and I continued to set clear limits. However, it seemed like a positive move. In contrast, my father was unyielding. Still, he pretended to be the victim and blamed Chloe and me for the family's troubles. He didn't want to be in the same room as me, so he skipped a number of family gatherings. And even though it was difficult, he made sure to express his dissatisfaction when he did turn there. He might never change, I had to admit. Although it wasn't simple, therapy assisted me in accepting that I had no control over his actions. I was solely in charge of I've discovered so much about what family really means as a result of everything. Tradition and blood are irrelevant. It's about the individuals that genuinely care about and support you. Grandma Chloe and a few close friends have supported me through everything, in my opinion. I'm still trying to get over the wounds my parents caused me. But I feel like I'm headed in the right direction for the first time in years. I'm creating a nice life for myself, liberated from their poisonous demands. That feels better than any inheritance, to be honest.